How can capitalism best be described? It's very important that people are made aware of what capitalism is, minus the leftist ideology that poisons the well. It's a lack of moral standards in the realm of free speech that have allowed ideologues to pervert and destroy objective definitions, capitalism being chief among these. It's unfortunate that so many insist on protecting those that have no respect for the responsibility to truth, but this won't stop me breaking through the revisionist lies with this video. First, let's make one thing clear. There is no such thing as capitalism, and it would be nice if people stopped using the word altogether. This statement might sound unbelievable or even hyperbolic to some, but by the end of this video I will show why this is the case. The very word capitalism was coined by Karl Marx and is loaded full of ideological baggage. That's not to say that Marx didn't draw his definition from kernels of truth, but as is always the case with Marxists and other leftists, they take certain facts and twist them to fit their own beliefs, peppering the truth with lies and dogma. The coining of the term capitalism was an attempt by Marx to suggest that certain behaviours were a type of ism and therefore amounted to ideology. In reality, the polar opposite is true. Socialism is the ideology, while what Marx called capitalism is merely peaceful and cooperative behaviour manifesting all around us, and is no more about ideology than any other natural activity. Given that the word capitalism is a misnomer, I really don't like to use it. But unfortunately, most people lack the understanding of economics to grasp what you are talking about if you use more appropriate terminology. What makes matters worse is that Marxist dogma is so pervasive that the word is etched into the public consciousness. So what name better describes what Karl Marx called capitalism? To answer this, we need to know what this system is and how it works. When two people come together to trade, this is the most basic aspect of what Karl Marx called capitalism. Even the word trade is far more appropriate than capitalism, and we can understand a little bit more about how this system works by going back to the work of classical economist Adam Smith. Famously, Adam Smith coined the term the invisible hand. While he only used the metaphor a few times in his work, this doesn't detract from the economic behaviour it describes. There are three key economic principles that Smith set out, and only by understanding them can anyone grasp even the most basic premises of this topic. Smith's three principles are as follows. Number one is self-interest. In other words, people engage in economic activity because they have something to gain from it. No one rational is going to bother doing anything they aren't benefiting from in some way. This is why all planned economies can only exist if people are threatened and forced to take part. Even under these circumstances, people will go out of their way to satisfy their self-interest, either by avoiding work or by defying certain rules and limits. Principle number two is competition. Not only does this encourage greater consumer choice, but also encourages suppliers to provide better quality and lower priced products than their rivals. Many will often suggest that free markets inevitably lead to monopolies, so therefore competition is undermined. But it's only through force and coercion that monopolies can exist. In a free market, a lack of competition could only come about if consumers prefer a certain product, and therefore choose not to spend their money elsewhere, albeit this will inevitably lead to gaps that can be filled by new competitors, rejuvenating the market once more. Principle number three is supply and demand. The rarer the product and the more people want it, the more suppliers will be able to charge for it. Equally, the more plentiful the product and the less people want it, the less suppliers will be able to charge. If people fully understand the economic activity that I just laid out, they will realise that value is subjective. A lack of respect for natural price action is what causes terrible economic instability, hence the reason that centrally planned economies all fail catastrophically in the end. No one can consistently predict the true value of anything. Only by respecting self-interest, competition, and supply and demand can we discover value, and this cannot be accurately controlled by human intervention. This explains why gold is so expensive, given that it's rare and is such a useful metal for so many different purposes, three being luxury goods, industrial applications, or a historical form of monetary exchange. Conversely, anything that's easy to acquire and readily available is going to attract little to no consumer attention. This entire process, which occurs naturally all around us, is what Adam Smith described as the invisible hand. This description of trade is what some might call capitalism. But as already stated, even the word trade itself is more fitting. There is, however, a more complex element to what Karl Marx called capitalism. Capital is a word that describes anything of value that might be owned by another. It could be property, wine, cars, clothing, furniture, and generally anything that has value to individuals. The further back in history we go, the harder it was for humans to store anything valuable for long. Gradually, this problem has been dealt with through human ingenuity, allowing people to store value for greater lengths of time, instead of living day to day. For example, the modern fridge allows people to store food, or money allows people to store value in banks. The storage of value has led to a greater excess of value, meaning that people have spare value that they aren't using. So instead of this value being idle, people can lend this to someone else on the condition that they're rewarded in some way when it's returned to them. This might be interest on a loan, but it could theoretically be almost anything that two parties agree to. This exchange of capital is what Karl Marx loathed, and was part of the inspiration for what Karl Marx defined as capitalism. Karl Marx's irrational hatred of what he called capitalism was theoretically and practically unsound. It's already been explained why, in practice, planned economies do not work due to a natural equilibrium in relation to value, and history proves this in droves. But even in theory, Marx's ideas were clearly a projection of his own prejudices and inadequacies, with his terrible management of money and his total disregard for repaying his debts, along with his constant scrounging for money from all those around him, including his family and his longtime friend Friedrich Engels. Aside from trade, one could also use the terms free market economics, free enterprise, or even voluntary exchange to describe what leftists call capitalism. Since the activities outlined in this video are nothing to do with isms and are merely activities that have been going on since the dawn of human civilization, particularly at the simpler level of trade, it's important not to give credence to the word capitalism, which is merely a leftist attempt to poison the well by conflating naturally peaceful interaction with ideology, pushing us one step closer to the suppression of natural rights and responsibilities. One thing that needs to be said before I conclude is that free markets can only work when there are strong moral limits in place, and I often cite slavery as an example because most people agree with this. These limits are a contentious issue, even among stronger advocates of a free market. But as usual, I argue that free market activity should never violate the natural rights and responsibilities of the individual. While I do put a lot of faith in a free market and certainly consider it to be superior to any other system ever conceived by humanity, I still believe that without strong moral limits, it's only a matter of time before a free market leads to a degradation of virtue. This is Rocking Mystery, over and out.